Dr. Lubchenco has here pointed to a number of different areas. We've barely begun to scratch the surface. So let's open it up to questions from the audience. I know that there was a number of people who, and I believe there's a microphone right over there, right? Yep. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Lubchenco. David Barron, I'm the chairman of the advisory board for Metcalf Institute and health and science editor for the public radio program The World. One thing you haven't mentioned is geoengineering. Now, John Holdren made some mention of geoengineering some time ago in front of a journalist and didn't work out so well. So I don't know if you're willing to say anything about it, but seeing as you are responsible for our oceans, and there's talk of fertilizing the oceans or the atmosphere, putting sulfate aerosols into the upper atmosphere, to what extent is geoengineering on the table, and is it being talked about within the administration?
Thanks for that question, David, I guess. Not all geoengineering is the same. There are some ideas that might have merit, there are some that are just big question marks, and there's some that are probably just completely wacko. And I think that what is most appropriate here is to have a process for which we can separate those and know, where in that spectrum they fall. And there needs to be a mechanism, I believe, for having scientific scrutiny of these ideas in a way that can balance and identify what are the trade-offs, what are the risks, what are the merits, how credible is this? And we don't currently have a process for doing that.
So that is not currently being done by the administration?
That is not being done by the administration. It's not being done by anybody. I think there's a lot of talk about some of these different ideas, and every time you turn around, there's another idea. Or some ideas that we thought were crazy ideas are sort of back on the table. And I think people are going to, as the urgency of addressing the climate change problem increases, which it will, there will be intense pressure to find some solutions. And some of those solutions are going to be geoengineering ones. And I believe we need a better mechanism for evaluating the pros and cons of some of the different proposals that will be out there.
The question? One that I was asked to ask before we came up by somebody who was not necessarily going to be here was about shipping. When would carbon pollution from shipping be controlled? It falls within your purview. It's expected to go up a great deal. I believe I was quoted, I haven't checked this out at all, 3% now, and it maybe go up to 18% within a very few decades.
Planes first.
Planes first. That's a big change for our modern culture.
It is.
Talk to us about planes.
Well, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's a much more substantial contribution to global greenhouse gases than is shipping. Not to minimize, I think we need to take a good hard look at everything. But once we have some kind of cap and trade system in place, then I think we can tee up those discussions.
Once we have some cap, in other words, once carbon is no longer free,
yes,
it's no longer free to put carbon into the atmosphere.
We need a mechanism for addressing those, and whether it's a carbon tax or cap and trade, those are the mechanisms by which you can start to examine all the different specific activities and the contributors.
So one of the big surprises you expect for the public will be that when we have a carbon-restricted world, suddenly people are going to be looking at a big change in how we use airplanes?
I think that will come, yes, but it's not. I think there have been calls for regulating what different sectors of the transportation industry contribute, and I think that that's a discussion that we have yet to have.
All right.
Yeah, Dr. Lubchenco, Bob Semple. I'm a member of the Grantham jury. This is a rather narrow question compared to the larger strategies you've been talking about, but any domestic strategies that you choose will necessarily apply to our own exclusive economic zone out 200 miles. My question is, what kind of leverage do you have, or what kind of leverage could the administration use to protect some of the larger fish that are deeply in peril, and I'm thinking of tuna and sharks, that over which we have no control outside of our 200-mile limit, but presumably we have some kind of leverage. They're both in desperate shape, and I'm hopeful that we can do something about them. But can you see any chance for them using the leverage of the United States government?
Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate you drawing attention to fisheries issues, and those are among the more challenging ones. I would say two things. One, that our first responsibility is to get our own house in order and to manage our fisheries in a sustainable fashion. And one of my highest priorities is ending overfishing. We are required by law, by the Magnuson-Stevens reauthorization to do that, but we are not on target to do that, and we are actively investigating new approaches to get us to that endpoint faster. That alone is not sufficient, but in parallel to managing our own fisheries more responsibly, we have regional fishery management councils, organizations that for which we are we're at the table, and I think we need to be more responsible in having those regional fishery management organizations be managing their fisheries much better than they have. And that's the way they are structured makes that a challenge. And we have not been as successful in that as we need to be and should be. International fisheries are a challenge, and that's what's regulated. There is still all the IUU, the illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing that happens above and beyond, whether there are good quotas in place and whether they are adhered to. So tuna and sharks are two of the major challenges that are out there. We are actively exploring ways within NOAA of tackling this head on. But the more you write about it, the more it helps us.